You're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. Our presenting sponsor is the end-to-end production solution, Green Slate. Whether it's start paperwork, time cards, purchase orders, or reports, everything is digital, everything is on the app, and you can work from wherever you are. The future is actually here. If you'd like to hear this pitch in person or see it for yourself, call me, as I am working there as the SVP of West Coast Operations. Here's my number, 310-789-2001, extension 323. Or email me, julie.walker@gslate.com. Now, back to my weekend job. For today's episode, I spoke with Jessie Levandov and Nina Reyes, the co-founders and directors of a company called Mala Forever. Mala Forever is an award-winning, women-run film and digital studio based in Los Angeles and New York. They develop and produce films, new media, and commissioned work that centers unheard voices. They are redefining the future of filmmaking through equitable production practices, and their growing community-based platform is a cultural hub for the radical femme revolution. Jessie is an award-winning community-based filmmaker, creative director, and educator. Her queer documentary series, Signified, was presented by the Guggenheim Lab, and her short film, The Gregs, won the Spirit Award at Slamdance. Her work has been featured in Teen Vogue, Huffington Post and Them. Nina is a countercultural filmmaker and creative director whose work is grounded in her point of view as a mixed-race, first-generation, Mexican-American, and Jewish woman. Her feature-length screenplay, La Paz, was a finalist for the 2017 Latino Screenwriting Project. Her short films, Organism and Invisible Men, have won press and played at festivals around the world, including Outfest, Frameline, and HBO New York Latino Film Festival. They are both fellow NYU alums with BFAs from Tisch School of the Arts. Go Violets! You can find us at theother50%.com for added features, photos, show notes, and the merch. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places. And also the full season of Catch a Break, The Insider's Guide to Getting Into and Navigating Hollywood, is now available on Apple Podcasts, all the podcast places, and on the website, catchabreakpodcast.com. Go check out that one too. We are working on season 2 as we speak. Okay, here's my conversation with Jessie Levandov and Nina Reyes. Have a listen. So welcome, you guys, and this is an NYU Alumni Fest today. Yeah. I'm with Jessie and Nina of Mala Forever. And let's start with talking about your company, and then I kind of want to dig into both of your backgrounds.
Awesome. So Mala Forever is a radical feminist film and digital studio. So we do films, short and feature films. We do a range of digital content, including a digital magazine that we produce that highlights underrepresented femme and non-binary creators. And we also are a creative agency, so we do commissioned work for organizations and companies that want to do videos that reach our community.
And that's Nina talking. Now, how do you define yourself as radical feminist? What does that mean? Jessie, you want to answer that one?
Sure, yeah. I think the way that I think about being a radical feminist is to be unapologetically bold, unapologetically empowered and embodied as a femme-identified person, for me personally, but also explicitly and unapologetically political.
I love it.
And to us, it's not really enough to be feminist in the sense of like joining the status quo or just doing things the way that things are already done in our industry, with just like feminine bodies in the space. But it's also important for us when we say radical to think outside the box and to actually rethink like how things are done behind the scenes, how people are paid, how different work is created from the ground up instead of from the top down.
So let's talk more about that, because it sounds like it's more than being the woman in the room or fighting your way into the current system. How do you envision it looking different?
Well, we talk about the fact that we're a community-based studio, and so process is equally as important as the stories that we're telling. And so we want to be empowering our community as we're creating this work, uplifting and centering the work of women, of femmes, of non-binary folks, of queer women, of women of color. And the way in which we create this studio from the ground up is very much centered in our vision and our beliefs as radical feminist filmmakers.
So what does that look like?
Yeah, it looks like everyone on our set being mostly women, mostly of color. Like, it looks like us having a holistic process as we curate work for our digital magazine. So we pay all of the contributors who just give us work to feature on our website, whereas a lot of outlets are like, oh, we'll just do this for exposure. Why don't you just do this to get your name out there?
It's not enough.
It's not enough. And when we think about bringing our community up and uplifting the people in our community, it's really intrinsically tied to like economic opportunity for us. It's like, we don't just want like our faces on the screen. We want people to get paid. We want to create real economic equality and change and justice through this work. So it doesn't matter like how much experience someone has, like they get paid the same amount for the same work as someone who has more experience or has a different background. It's important for us that everyone is compensated fairly.
And also the work that we feature in the digital magazine is completely uncensored, and we give artists complete creative freedom over the work that they're sharing on our platform, which is really important too, especially, I mean, even in, queer spaces or feminist spaces, to think about whose voices are being uplifted and whose stories are being given representation and space, and whose aren't. And so we're really committed to making sure that the artists feel that they have agency in the way that their work is represented and in choosing the work that they want to share.
So being truly inclusive.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we spend, that's important to us is we do a lot of mentorship in terms of like emerging creators who are in our community. So like Jessie and I have both spent a lot of time doing education in inner cities in the Bay Area and New York. And so there's a lot of like young people in our lives who have that dream, want to be in the industry, but it's so exclusive to get that foot in the door. So there's a lot of just like, we get emails all the time, even from people we don't know, who are like, hey, like I have this idea, I've never made a film before, like what do I do, how do I do it? And we're happy to just like hop on the phone with people, even having no stake in the project, just to do as much as we can to like share the wisdom and the experience that we have with other people.
So let's talk about all the different pieces of your company. Like you've talked about the digital magazine. What's that?
The digital magazine it's collections of work that we curate. We both produce work for the magazine and also curate work from other artists. We curate through a submission process. So we put out a call for submissions and have gotten so many responses. And then from that, we curate thematically at different editorial moments in the year. So in November, we released our first issue in alignment with the midterm elections, and we featured the stories and the voices of women of color on American identity. And then in February, we featured a collection of work by emerging Black creators for Black History Month. And then in June, our most recent issue was Pulp Dreams, and that was in alignment with Pride. So we featured over 15 LGBTQIA creators from around the world. And that's both film, photography, visual art, writing. We define media very openly.
Oh, okay. So you're doing all of those formats. I was wondering if it was video or writing, but it's everything.
It's everything.
Yeah. So each issue is a collection of multimedia across different formats, and we host it all on our website on malaforever.com, and then we also share content out on our Instagram platform, which is our main like community-based distribution channel that allows us to like create a conversation around each piece of work that's in the site.
Okay, and then you also have a creative agency?
Yeah, so we, both Jessie and I have been independent producers, directors, editors for over a decade. So we've done a lot of work with brands and with nonprofits to help create really amazing, like, professional video that typically features like underrepresented voices and faces, and a lot of the work that we've done, like especially with fashion, features like really strong images of women of color. And yeah, it's really, we love being able to partner with mission-aligned companies and organizations who are also trying to reach and to resonate and to uplift our target audience.
Yeah, so we're also thinking about how can we reach our community and our target audience in as many ways as possible and on as many platforms as possible. And commercial media historically has been such an exclusive and a toxic space, and so we want to bring our mission into those spaces and create work that's meaningful and powerful in those spaces as well.
Wonderful, and it's about time, honestly. Now, what about, you also make films. You're in town this week because of Outfest. You have a film there. Let's talk about that.
We have a short film. It's called Baby. I wrote and directed the film, and Nina produced the film. And it's a queer coming-of-age love story. It's about a young man named Ali who's a teenager growing up in the Bronx. And it's a tender, quiet day in the life of love story between two young people who are navigating just the tension between toxic masculinity and the way that plays out for them in their lives in all of these different spaces that they traverse. So navigating the tension between that and their coming to terms with their queerness and their desire, and figuring out how to express themselves in these spaces when they're being told in so many different ways that it's not okay to be who they are.
Now, I'm assuming you guys met at NYU. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you figured out you were like-minded and wanted to do this mission together?
Yeah, we actually met before college at a summer program at NYU for high school kids. So we met when we were 16 years old, and then definitely hit it off and lived together in college. So like,
Where'd you live?
we lived in 3rd North dormitory freshman year, and then Lafayette, and then we had our own apartments in the East Village and Park Slope. And yeah, it was just a really amazing our freshman year, we lived with 4 other young women. It was 3 actresses and 3 filmmakers. And
fun.
It was just like such an amazing creative experience, and definitely we both had the same tastes as far as films. We always loved like Pedro Almodovar and like Alfonso Cuarón, and we watched The L Word like obsessively our freshman year of college. So we always gravitated towards films and media that had a different perspective from the mainstream. And we were, our film class at the time was, I think, 3-to-1 men to women. So there were a lot more, there were a lot more men in our class than women. So we definitely just like really bonded and produced each other's films through college and have been creative partners ever since.
I'm surprised it was so lopsided. And at NYU, come on, man.
Yeah.
It really was. And also, Nina and I were both really committed to carving out space in spaces that were really not like the cinematography classes that were really male-dominated. Mm-hmm. And
I remember being in a film class at NYU, and we had broken up into groups, and there was this guy in the group who wouldn't let any of the women touch the camera. He kept grabbing it away from us. I was like, I think I need a different group. This is not going to work out.
Girl, don't get me started. Yeah. I remember like, being in camera classes and being like, hey, we should rig this that way. And nobody listening to me. And then like 10 minutes later, like a man would suggest the same thing. And they'd be like, oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Oh, what a genius.
That was just typical microaggressions.
Really? That's still going on?
Mm-hmm. Well, this was 15 years ago, so not super recent.
Okay.
I think nowadays they have a more 50-50 gender split more proactively, but yeah, in our time, which was way before social media took off, way before Me Too, it was still like that.
Yikes.
Doesn't feel that long ago, but
right.
Yeah. No. It wasn't.
Well, the way things are happening so quickly now, it seems like a million years ago, but really it was yesterday. Mm-hmm. Tell me what influenced you to come to this worldview, I guess is the question.
Yeah. Well, for me, I grew up in the city of San Francisco, which was, when I was growing up, there was such a diverse place and was so entrenched in a progressive political identity. And like the hippie movement of like the 60s and 70s was such a part of like the cultural heritage that I was born into, as well as the like Chicano rights movement. My mom is an immigrant from Mexico and is an immigrant rights activist. So being around like the Mexican community in the Bay Area and all the activism that was happening, especially in the 90s, because we had our own version of Donald Trump in the 90s as a governor, who's this man called Pete Wilson, who was passing a lot of anti-immigration legislation in the state. So I just remember like being really young, going to rallies, and then growing up in high school. George W. Bush was elected when we were in 8th grade, so like spending 9/11 was right as we started our freshman year of high school. So our whole high school life was really defined by that second Bush administration and the laws that were being passed at that time, a lot of anti-gay legislation. And I just remember like going to a lot of protests in high school, a lot of anti-war protests, a lot of like impeach Bush protests, and just being really radicalized at a young age.
Yeah, you were wide awake in San Francisco.
Totally. And I remember being really culture shocked when I got to New York.
New York is not as progressive as you might imagine.
Nearly as progressive. And that was a shock to me because I thought, oh yeah, New York, California, blue states.
Right,
same. And I just remember being really shocked at how conservative a lot of people were, even in New York City. I remember handing out Bush. I was going to a lot of anti-Bush rallies, even when I got to NYU. I remember like getting up early one day, taking a bus to Washington, D.C. for a protest, and handing out these flyers for these like impeach Bush rallies. And I remember trying to give one to this older woman, and she just like accosted me. She was like, how could you? You're so unpatriotic. Like, and I was like, wow.
Oh yeah,
really
those are the days
that.
where if you questioned Bush, you were unpatriotic.
Yeah, it was really a different. I mean, it was the same climate, but different president. Yeah.
Jessie, how about you?
Growing up, I guess I always thought of myself as a feminist, and I had a mom who always encouraged me to do things that weren't traditionally like welcoming for young girls. I was the only girl in Cambridge youth ice hockey of hundreds and hundreds of boys and me, and
how was that?
It was rough, especially when we started hitting, when we started checking. Nobody would pass me the puck. Nobody would check me. And it really interfered with the game and my ability to like be my full self and to be an athlete. And then so there wasn't girls youth hockey then. This is such a silly New England. My roots are really coming through right now. But there wasn't a girls league until I was in 8th grade. And then
so you had to play with the boys, and it sounds like they were a little bit afraid to actually play with you.
Yeah, and they were threatened by my presence. And it was like a really interesting, and I started playing when I was 9. And so it was a really like interesting early education in gender dynamics. And I was kind of like not a gender normative person as a young person, but I didn't have the language for queerness, and I didn't have the language for that. And so growing up in that way, that shifted as I got older, but it's interesting to reflect back on that now.
Did people tell you should go be a figure skater? You shouldn't be playing hockey?
Yeah, I got made fun of, I got teased, I got bullied, but it was something that I loved so much, and it was a way to like physically express myself, and it was such a source of joy. And then later in high school, I played varsity girls hockey, and it was like, even though I was so different from everyone on the team, I was an artist and didn't want to be an Olympic hockey player, but it was like the most empowering, the most powerful, the most beautiful community, an example of community that I had as a young person. And then as I got older, and now in my community in New York is an incredibly vibrant, diverse, political, queer community. And so I really was able to bridge my passion for, filmmaking and filmmaking as a tool for social justice and social movements with the actual movement work and the activism and the community organizing and the youth arts education that is like truly such an incredible has been such an incredible education and influence in my life and all of the work that I do.
So now both of you, how and when did you know you were filmmakers and artists?
I always knew that I was an artist. I was always a really creative young person. I was really passionate about music and about visual arts and storytelling in different ways. And as I got older, and I always played music, and then I discovered photography and how powerful it is to tell stories visually. And I also love to write. And so filmmaking, I started by making like silent horror films.
As you do.
As you do. And then, it wasn't until the program where Nina and I met as a 17-year-old that I realized that I wanted to be a filmmaker. And film felt like such a powerful synthesis of all of these different mediums that I loved so much. Music, writing, storytelling, visual storytelling.
It has all the things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nina, how about you?
I was always obsessed with movies as a very young child. I would always be obsessed with one movie at a time, and I would rewind it. These were the days of VHS. I'd rewind it and watch it over and over again. The first one was my mom says I was obsessed with Cinderella when I was in preschool.
Me too.
And I would
Wasn't.
I would insist on changing into my Cinderella dress that I had every day after school and watching Cinderella. Then it was Aladdin in kindergarten. Then it was Mask in second grade. Then it was Twister and Independence Day and all these great Hollywood movies. Scream in middle school. So I was always really obsessed with movies, but just as a fan. And I always loved fashion. So when I was young, through middle school, I really wanted to be a fashion designer. So my mom signed me up for this after-school class, or this Saturday class through the Academy of Art in San Francisco for teenagers. And I did I think the fashion design class was full. So she signed me up for the video class. And that was my first time getting exposed to what a camera is. And they were this is a shot, this is a frame. And we were just, me and a couple other just misfit kids were just running around downtown San Francisco making videos. And then the next time around I was able to do the fashion class, so I was oh cool, I want to do that. And I going to the first class and just her explaining the teacher being this is how you draw a fashion design. You have to draw the skinny model. It's called a coquette. You have to do it this way. That's just how it is. And I remember
too tall, too thin. So the clothes look good.
I just remember being ew, this is not what I'm trying to do. Anytime someone tells me this is how things are done and you have to do them this way, I'm instantly repulsed. I actually didn't tell my mom that I hated the class, and I pretended to go to this class for 6 weeks every Saturday. And I remember watching the kids in the video class in the park. So I would just eat my lunch in the park while this class was happening, and my mom thought I was taking a fashion design class. And being oh, that's that was so fun. I want to do that again. And then and then a couple things started happening. I saw Pulp Fiction for the first time when I was 14. And that was the first movie that I saw that I was wow, this is so different. I've never seen anything like this. And I want to know more about who made this and how it was made. And that's what made me want to start looking at what happens behind the scenes to actually create a film. Went through a Tarantino phase for sure in high school. And then I went to a job fair at my high school, and the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, which is a nonprofit arts museum in San Francisco, was hiring for a program called Young Artists at Work that takes 15 kids from public schools in San Francisco. And at the time we got $10 an hour, which is a lot of money to a high school kid, to learn different artistic practices from professional artists. So for a whole semester we did video.
What, they paid you?
They paid us to learn how to make videos. Yeah.
Wow.
And that was the first time I learned Final Cut Pro, which was the editing platform of the time. And it just got deeper into it. And from then on, I was I want to do like, I want to be a filmmaker.
Like, that's it.
Yeah, because I'd also met these professional filmmakers who were mentoring us, and I was like, oh, that's like a job someone has. Like, it's not this far-flung thing. Like, it's actually possible. And yeah, and then found other opportunities through school. Like, I also did spoken word in high school through this organization called Youth Speaks. And so my second job after Young Artists at Work was being on the youth board at Youth Speaks. So again, we got paid like $10 an hour to help run this organization that did like free creative writing workshops and open mics and performances and a poetry slam every year. And I was on the documentation committee because I loved video and taking photos. And so I got to like be part of this really amazing creative community, but also like holding a camera the entire time. So it was kind of the best of both worlds. And that's what led into NYU for me.
That's great. Now, what do you guys make of what has happened with women over the last few years?
What do you mean?
You're both looking at me like, what?
Well, no,
Like the explosion of...
So, well, the last short film that I wrote and directed is a short called Invisible Men, which is about a young woman who finds a pair of glasses that make men invisible to her. So she gets to imagine like what the world is like if men didn't exist. And that we shot that in 2016 and released it in 2017, maybe like 6 months before the Weinstein scandal broke. And that was kind of the spark that really ignited the whole like Me Too movement and conversation about women's oppression in Hollywood.
That was really timely.
Really timely, and then coinciding with the election of Donald Trump. So like, I think it's been really fascinating to see the conversation about women and women's rights and women's equality in society at large and in Hollywood really become like such a front and center conversation over the last few years. I think there's like a lot of us, especially women in our generation, have been doing so much groundwork around trying to get our own voices heard and around trying to tackle certain issues like sexual assault and like inequality in pay. And
now, did you realize growing up that there were still all these issues that we needed to tackle? Just to put you guys in a box, are you millennials? Which generation are you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We are right in the middle of the millennial generation, yeah. We were born in 1987. So our generation is so, I think, so cool and lucky to have seen how much the world has changed technologically and socially.
It's unbelievable.
We're the generation that, I mean, I'm proud of the fact we elected Barack Obama our senior year of college. So the first presidential election we could vote in, we elected Obama, which I think was the result of like all of us having grown up during the Bush years. And I definitely remember, I mean, like Jessie said, you don't really have language for certain things, but you see like, hey, everyone that I'm seeing on TV is a white man. Everyone I'm seeing in the movies is a white man. Everyone who I'm seeing in political power is a white man. Like, and that's not the world that I'm living in. Like, I'm living in a world where all my friends and I are mixed race, where all of our moms are like powerful women, where every woman that I know is like such a badass. Like, that it doesn't make sense that
there's a disconnect somewhere.
Yeah.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that women have been having these conversations and leading these conversations and these movements forever. And so it's at once incredibly empowering and exciting and inspiring to see the ways in which things are shifting and in the ways in which these conversations are taking the national stage in a different way. And it's also frustrating to feel like things are shifting, but they're also not.
Right, because really we're only here.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, what is coming from these conversations actually? Like, what actually is shifting as a result of these movements? And I'm seeing the ways in which so many women are still being silenced. which really speaks to kind of like what you were saying before. It's not about just being the woman in the room, but how can like women as a community or communities of women, and women don't have this like monolithic experience, right? Like you have to think about it in an intersectional way, but how can women actually support each other? What does it look like to shift power? What does it look like to redistribute resources? And things have always happened from the ground up. That's the only way anything has ever changed. And so it's like simultaneously incredibly exciting, and also I want to stay really grounded in the work that needs to be done and how that work needs to be done.
So in an ideal world, what is your vision, say 10, 20 years from now? What would it look like? It being America, maybe, the country?
Well, I don't know. Part of this is my hope. Part of my vision for the future is my hope for just what I'm seeing right now already. I think we've both worked a lot with young people, and seeing just the difference between how young people carry themselves now and the things that they're aware of socially is so different from when we grew up, and is really like hopeful. And there's this quote that I love by Audre Lorde. I don't know if it's a quote, but this idea that she espoused of like, what are the words that you do not have yet? What is the language that you don't yet have to describe your experience? So things like consent or things like gender, queerness are not not words that we had growing up. And I think one thing, like when we were on the set of Baby, that I noticed, so Jessie's film Baby takes place in the Bronx and is about a queer teen named Ali. It's played by, it's a gay character played by a young man who does not identify as gay. And his love interest in the film is also another young man who does not identify as gay. And they're non-actors, so this is not like, oh yeah, I'm going to play this role.
So how was that for them?
Personally, I just was surprised at how it wasn't even a thing for them to do that. They did it with such ease and such it just wasn't a big deal for them to imagine playing a character who is gay even though they're not.
That is a super shift, because I'm thinking even my generation.
Oh yeah.
The guys would be like, no.
Yeah.
But have we shifted it so that gay isn't a bad thing, so it doesn't matter?
I think that we've come a long way in that sense. I caused quite a stir at my high school. In my senior year class photo, I turned to, everybody does silly things in the class photo, and I turned to one of my good friends and I was like, let's kiss. And we kissed for the photo, and it became this whole controversy in San Francisco, the center
of all places.
Yeah, in the center of gay culture. They didn't want to print the photo in the yearbook. It was this whole big deal. And now just the way that kids, I know not in all places, but I think in a lot of urban areas, a lot more progressive cities, kids don't think being gay is a big deal or something that should be shunned or something that is not okay.
Yeah, the kids I see are living in the future as far as diversity and all the spectrums of gender and sexuality and all of that. So then, there's one school of thought of, they're all going to die out. We're all going to be fine. But then you see Virginia last year with those young people. You see those young assholes in D.C. who were, the thing I'm talking about. What do we make of that? They're still young people who are stuck in some other century.
I think it has to do so much with the community that you're in and the folks who are around you. And I think that I definitely live in a bubble. I live in New York City, and the young people that I was working with for the better part of 10 years were from all over New York. And it was so amazing because in my classrooms, I had trans folks, I had gender nonconforming folks, I had young people who identified as queer, and also young people who had didn't, we would go around in the beginning and say our pronouns and make sure that we had conversations about that and why that's important, why it's important to not make assumptions about anything about a person, about somebody's gender or sexuality or any part of their identity. And there are young folks who are like, why are we doing this? This, like, obviously I'm a he, or obviously I'm she, her. But it was really generative, and like a lot of youth who had never had these conversations, or who like maybe felt some kind of way about queerness or about gender nonconforming folks, to see them become family with trans youth, with gender nonconforming youth, with queer youth, was really powerful. And so it really speaks to the power of creating space, and creating safe space, and creating spaces that are actually diverse and not just like tokenizingly diverse, to have room for people to better understand each other and to better understand each other's life experiences. And that is incredibly healing and incredibly powerful. And it's from spaces like that that Baby was generated, and really inspired by seeing the ways in which these different young people were growing and were like finding home in each other, even if they were coming from radically different understandings and life experiences.
And when we talk about like what we're building with Mala Forever and our vision for the future, like the 10, 20 years out vision, I have a lot of, like, I know a lot of people who are really like freaked out about Donald Trump and like freaked out about what's happening right now. And just everything that I know about political resistance and community building from my whole life is that like what we have to focus on is building the world that we want without them. It's not about, as much as it's tempting, like it's not about converting people who don't believe in the world that we want to get on board. Like the best that we can do is build what we want for ourselves. So that's like the thinking that we have with Mala Forever, and building our own studio with our own resources to tell our own stories, that our community and our audience is gonna pay money to see those stories or invest in themselves, because the money that's flowing through Mala Forever goes right back to the community that created it. One of our taglines is like, we've been cutting out the middlemen since 2018. So right now we have the knowledge, we have the experience, we have the talent, we have everything that we need in order to create what we want for ourselves. And so like for me, 10, 20 years from now, that looks like us having like all the same resources that what you see at YouTube Creator Space, or what you see at Netflix, or what you see at Amazon, or what you see on the Paramount lot. Like our long-term vision is to actually have what we call Mala Ranch, which is like modeled after like the Skywalker Ranch, which would be an actual physical space that is a whole like creation space that is somewhere in nature, ideally, that is just like land and property and like physical resource that also can house and like be like a really generative, creative production space for artists, where like artists can come and create. We're just scaling up and churning out the content that we want to see created for us, by us, about us, near us.
Love it.
Yeah.
Now, can we talk about the money?
Sure.
Yeah.
How is your company making money now?
Now we've been surviving from, we got a grant, a post-production grant for Baby, and also through our creative agency and our client work.
Yeah, and a very small amount of seed funding.
And a small amount of seed funding.
So we've survived a year without what most people start out with who form studios. Like most studios form with millions of dollars in the bank.
Yeah, because this is the challenge I find talking to people who have really mission-based companies, and you're doing this work, and it's so hard to just survive long enough to really do it.
Yeah. And for us, it is a patchwork right now between, right, like grants. We've also done a few soft crowdfunding campaigns. So we funded the last issue of our digital magazine just through small donations that actually we are now fiscally sponsored. So our digital magazine is officially like a nonprofit project right now through Allied Media Projects, which is a 501c3 organization that supports like radical, progressive, social justice-based art projects. and it's been really cool to see how our community has really stepped up to support the work that we're doing because it's what they want to see. So when we're like, hey, will you support this issue of our magazine that's like all wonderful queer, trans, like mostly POC voices, it's been really surprising to see how people are like, oh my God, yes, of course. Like, people are like, I don't even care about the tax donation, to be honest. But so there's that, there's the grant, getting the client-based work, so it's really been a patchwork. And as we move forward, thinking about how we drive and create resources for what we're doing is a really big conversation that we have constantly. Yeah,
because you have to get really savvy about the business in addition to the content.
Yeah, and the reality is, like, we're a business that is like within a capitalist economy, and most artists, most small businesses don't really realize, like, most businesses are not profitable for a while. Years. And so when we look at like how we define success, like, it's in terms of a business, like, it's really about like, okay, how can we like get the capital that we need and not hold ourselves to this standard that like other big giants in the space don't hold themselves to. So like, how can we run with the big boys by acting like the big boys sometimes? It's like, so many of these big companies, so many films don't make money. So yeah, that's something that I think has been a big like learning, I think.
Okay, what advice do you have for young people coming up behind you?
I'd say a piece of advice that I have for young people coming up behind us is to be unapologetic about who you are, and to trust in the power of your voice, and to trust in the wisdom that exists inside of you, and that is so incredibly powerful.
I love that. I love the word unapologetic. Because I think we've all been conditioned for so long to apologize. I think it's great. What did I not ask you about that I should have asked you about?
What we're working on next?
Yeah.
What are you working on next?
We are developing a feature film called Wild Ones, which is about two queer Latinx best friends who hit the road with a group of wild lesbian separatists. And so it's a road film, it's a coming-of-age film, and it is a story that was inspired by the lesbian separatist movements of the 60s and 70s, but it takes place now.
Okay, what is a lesbian separatist?
A lesbian separatist in the 60s and 70s was a movement of lesbian-identified women who did not speak or engage with men at all unless men were in positions of service. So they would speak to men who were waiters or speak to men who were subservient in some kind, but other than that existed completely off the grid and completely separate from patriarchal social fabrics.
They were just not having it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of women's lands, and so there were these like large women's lesbian communes that existed, and so we were inspired by that movement and what was going on in that time, and wanted to think about, well, what does that mean now? It's a very different time. It's a very different political landscape. The way we think about gender is a lot more complex and nuanced and non-binary, right? And so to think about what does it mean to be, again, like completely unapologetic about who you are, to exist and resist capitalist, toxic systems of being in the world, and like what would it look like to just exist outside of that space.
Interesting. Tell me again what it's called?
Wild Ones.
Wild Ones. Okay. How do we find you?
Our website is www.malaforever.com. That's MALA forever.com. And our Instagram handle is @_malaforever_.
Okay, and we'll link to all of that on my website as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys. This was great talking to you.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Jessie Levandov and Nina Reyes of Mala Forever for sharing their stories. And special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on all your favorite podcast providers and leave a review. And of course, on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out in letters, for added features, bios of our guests, and the merch. You can also follow us on all the social media platforms and go subscribe also to catchabreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.